Growing up, I thought my dad was a hero, and I mean a real, actual hero, not just someone I looked up to. I was 4 when he disappeared from my life in August 2000, and Mom immediately started saying he worked as a firefighter in another city, that his job was dangerous, that he couldn't visit much. I remember feeling proud, even though his face was already blurring for me. Just a tall man who smelled like cigarettes and Old Spice. In kindergarten and then grade school, when teachers did the "what do your parents do" thing, I'd shoot my hand up first and say my dad ran into burning buildings and pulled people out. Mom had a photo, some guy in turnout gear in front of a red engine, and she'd point at it and go, "That's your dad at work." Look how brave I believed her completely. I told classmates, teachers, random people in grocery lines if they smiled at me, "My dad is a hero. My dad saves lives." I carried that like a medal. No one asked why he never called or wrote or showed up on birthdays. If they did, Mom had reasons. He's on a 24-hour shift. The station's phone lines are weird. He'll make the next Christmas for sure. When I asked too many questions, she'd sit me down with hot chocolate and say, "He loves you, but he has to take care of people. That's who he is." I'd nod and feel big about it. I even practiced how I'd talk when he finally came back, like I'd meet him halfway at an airport. I pictured a lot of airports, and we'd recognize each other in some instant way. The photo did a lot of lifting. I kept it in a cheap plastic frame on my dresser and straightened it every morning. If the edges curled, I taped them. The helmet number meant nothing to me, but it looked official, and that was enough. When I turned 12 in 2008, Mom called me into the living room after school. She was on the couch in our small Phoenix apartment, crying, holding a paper folded into a triangle like a letter you keep reading and can't finish. "Your father died," she said, with a voice I'd never heard from her, empty and far away, like she was reporting on a stranger. She said there'd been a big warehouse fire in Tempe 2 weeks earlier. He tried to save workers trapped inside. The roof collapsed. He didn't make it out. She opened the letter. Some Phoenix Fire Department header. A seal. Condolences. Thank you for his sacrifice. The word hero in clean typed lines. I took it all in like a punch. I didn't go to school for a week. I cried until I was wrung out. I lay in bed and pictured the scene, tried to imagine heat I couldn't imagine, tried to see his face inside a mask. When I finally went back, Mrs. Clark hugged me every morning and said how sorry she was. Kids gave me cards and drawings, and a few wore black ribbons. They'd never met him, but it didn't matter. The story did the work. My dad wasn't just a hero now. He was a hero who died saving people. That lifted me up in a way that felt wrong and right at the same time. I carried that story through middle school, high school, and past graduation. 13 years. I told it to new friends, to girls I dated, to co-workers at my first job. My dad died a firefighter, I'd say, and people would look at me with that mix: respect, pity, something that opens doors. It made me feel sturdy when I didn't feel sturdy. Anytime I pictured him, I used the photo and the letter like guardrails. I didn't mess with them. I didn't Google anything. I didn't want to mess it up. At 25, I married Emily, a nurse I met at work, the kindest person I'd ever known. We did a smallish wedding at a downtown Phoenix hotel, about 100 people. Her big family, my few relatives, friends from school and work. It was a good night. Drinks, dancing, bad speeches. I didn't invite anyone from my father's side. Mom said they'd pulled away after he died, moved out of state, blamed her for something I couldn't get straight. It sounded bitter and old, so I let it go. I figured I'd build my own branch and not look back. Near midnight, when the DJ switched to slow songs and most people were drunk enough to get sentimental, Mom's cousin Danny, who I'd seen maybe 5 times in my life, came over. He was swaying, reeking of whiskey and smoke, eyes red. He slapped my shoulder hard enough to slosh my beer. "Listen, kid," he rasped, voice shredded. "Enough of this firefighter hero crap. You're a grown man. Time to know the truth." I stared at him like he'd mixed me up with someone else. I tried to laugh it off, said he'd had a few too many. He grabbed a fistful of my shirt and leaned in, way too close. "Your father was never a firefighter, you hear me? Never. He didn't die a hero. It's all lies. Your mother's lies. Since you were 4, his spit hit my cheek. I remember his hand shaking, whether from booze or anger. I don't know. Emily saw us and rushed over, pulled Danny back by the elbow, told him he needed water. Mom was suddenly there and then gone, sprinting out of the ballroom. I caught a glimpse of her disappearing into the women's restroom. The DJ kept the song going. People laughed and leaned into each other. I stood on the dance floor, holding my empty glass, surrounded by dancers who had no idea my world had just fallen apart. On Sunday, I went to Mom's apartment at 10 in the morning without calling. I knocked until she opened. She was in a robe with swollen red eyes, clearly up all night. I told her I wouldn't leave until she told me the truth, the real truth. No lies. We sat on the same couch where she had told me my father died 13 years ago. She cried for almost 2 hours before words lined up. What she finally said was worse than anything I'd pictured. Worse than if he had actually died. "My father," she said, "Brad Coleman, was never a firefighter. He was a sales manager at Honest Joe's on the edge of Phoenix, selling used cars. Average. Nothing heroic." In June 2000, she filed for divorce after finding a love letter in his car from a 20-year-old secretary at the dealership. Old story. 2 months later, August 14th, around 2 in the morning, he came to our house drunk and furious, yelling about how she ruined his life and took everything. I wasn't home. I was with Grandma for the weekend, so I didn't see any of it. Mom said he poured a gas can at the front door of our little place on Maple, flicked a lighter, and the fire ran across the porch and up the wall. She woke to heat and smoke, ran to the stairs, saw the entry a wall of flame. She went back to the bedroom, opened the window to the backyard, and screamed for help. Neighbors heard her. Mr. Cheng from across the street brought a ladder. He held it while she climbed down in bare feet. Someone had already called 911. She stood in the yard shaking while the porch burned. By the time the fire trucks got there, he was gone. They caught my father 3 days later. He was hiding at his brother's place in Tucson and figured he could sneak to Mexico and start over. The police found him fast. His brother handed him over when they arrived with a warrant. At trial, Dad tried to say it was an accident, that he only wanted to scare Mom into talking, that he dropped the lighter. But there were witnesses. Neighbors saw him through their windows, saw him pour gas along the steps and railing, watched him stand there as the house caught, and then drive away. He was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder and arson with intent to cause harm. He's at the state prison in Florence. He gets out in 2025 if they don't parole him earlier, which is now only a few months away. Mom said she couldn't tell a 4-year-old that his father tried to kill her. She couldn't say he was a felon in prison. Then time moved. She told one lie to protect me, then another to cover the first, and the firefighter story set like concrete. It grew details, the photo, the station, the letter, until it felt safe to live in. The photo was a random image she found on Google, printed, and put in a frame. The condolence letter she wrote herself on a public library computer and dressed it with a logo she pulled off the web. Every word and detail was fake. It's been almost a month since the wedding. I replay that couch conversation every day. For 13 years, I told everyone my dad died saving people. I used it as a shield and a ladder. Now it's nothing. Worse than nothing. In a few months, he'll be free. I don't know if I'll ever meet him. I'll never forget the phone call when Mom told me Mr. Gray died in prison. She was crying, repeating, I'm sorry, and I knew exactly why. It happened 5 years earlier when I was 19. Mom worked as a nurse and offered to help our neighbor Mrs. Collins take care of her paralyzed father for free. I helped with the heavy stuff, trash, groceries, lifting his wheelchair over the porch step. Sometimes I sat with him while Mrs. Collins went to doctor appointments. Mr. Gray seemed like a normal grandfather, quiet, always saying thanks like it embarrassed him. One afternoon, Mrs. Collins asked if I could stay with him for a couple hours. Mom was on shift and said, "You can handle it." I came over, checked his water, adjusted the TV volume. He asked me to bring an envelope from the bedroom. I said sure, and went down the hall. There was a nightstand with a couple magazines and a lamp that flickered if you nudged it. On the dresser was a small stack of envelopes under a rubber band. I grabbed the top one, brought it back. He opened it, looked inside a long time, then shook his head. "Wrong one," he said. "I need the blue one from the dresser drawer." I went back and pulled the drawer. Socks and underwear, nothing else. I checked the other side, same thing. I called out, "There's no blue one in here." He called back, "Help me up. I'll find it myself. My eyes are bad." I hesitated. He was heavy and his legs were stiff, but he sounded frustrated, not angry, like he needed to handle his own stuff. I figured walking him a few steps might actually be good for him. I locked the wheelchair, got his gait belt on, and we did that slow shuffle, heel then toe, his weeble steps leaning into my shoulder. In the bedroom, he sat on the edge of the bed and caught his breath. "My glasses fell under the bed this morning," he said. "Without them, I can't see the numbers on the documents." I knelt and lifted the bedspread. It was dim under there. Dust, a dropped pen cap, no glasses. I reached further, squinting, bracing my free hand on the mattress. That's when I felt his hand grab my shoulder, heavy and deliberate. He pulled me back and pushed down at the same time, trying to seat me beside him. "Hey, careful," I said, thinking maybe he was losing balance and needed me to brace him. But he didn't wobble. He guided, not clung. That detail stuck with me later. His voice changed, became soft in a way I'd never heard from him. "How old are you?" he asked, close to my ear. 19. "You're a beautiful boy. Sit and talk with me." He squeezed my shoulder like he was testing it. "You're a good boy, right?" Good boys help. My heart kicked up. I stood fast. He kept his grip and tugged. "Sit. Just a minute. You've grown up. I've watched you bring those bags in, strong arms." "I'm lonely," he said. He was still quiet, but it wasn't the shy quiet from before. It was practiced. There was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I kept my hands visible and steady. "Mr. Gray, I can't sit," I said. "I need to call my mom about your glasses." I eased my shoulder out of his grip by turning, the way they show you in a basic self-defense video. He tried to hold on, fingers digging, then lost my shirt fabric. I stepped back out of reach. He made this disappointed sound, almost laugh-like. "Don't be dramatic," he said, patting the bed. "It's just talking. You're a good boy. You know what I mean?" I moved to the doorway. "We'll look for your glasses later. I'm going to the kitchen." He didn't stand. He just watched me, head tilted, like he was measuring what would make me come back. In the kitchen, I stood by the counter, phone in hand, not sure what to say or who to call first. I didn't want to escalate and make it worse for Mrs. Collins when she got home. I also didn't want to leave him unattended and claim I abandoned him if he decided to complain. I texted Mom. Everything okay if I leave him in bed? Weird vibes. Then I put the house phone on the table and kept the wheelchair key and my keys in my pocket. I didn't turn off the TV because silence felt like a bad idea. I stayed where I could see the hall. He called out once, "Don't tell her I made you nervous." That would be rude. That line chilled me more than anything. He knew exactly what I was thinking. He knew the shape of it. Minute by minute, nothing else happened. No thumps, no movement. I kept replaying the shoulder grab. Was it support or control? I tried to imagine any legitimate reason he'd need me sitting on that bed to read numbers. I came up empty. Mrs. Collins came back early. "How was he?" she asked, juggling a paper bag from the pharmacy. I said, "He needs his glasses." "They might be under the bed." I didn't say the other part right then. I watched her face as she went down the hall. She joked, "Dad, quit hiding things." Normal. Too normal. I went home and told Mom everything. Every line he said. Where his hand was. How I stepped away. I expected anger or immediate action. Call Mrs. Collins. Call someone. Mom listened without interrupting. She had that clinical listening face she uses with anxious patients, and I hated seeing it turned on me. When I finished, she rubbed her temples like a migraine was starting. Then she frowned and said, "I misunderstood the situation." Mom said I was overreacting. "He's a lonely old man who just wanted to talk," she told me, like a diagnosis. I started to explain how he held my shoulder, the way his voice changed, how he asked me to sit on the bed. She cut me off. "Don't you dare say things like that about an elderly, sick person. That's disrespectful." I said it wasn't a guess. It was how it felt in the moment. She shook her head and started listing reasons I should be kinder. She said Mr. Gray helped Mrs. Collins raise her daughter when her husband ran away, and he deserved respect. I said I respected her work and Mrs. Collins, but I didn't feel safe in that room. She looked at me like I had insulted her. She told me to stop making it about myself and to show some compassion. I told Mrs. Collins I had too much homework and a group project. That was true, but the main reason was I couldn't get the bedroom scene out of my head. Mom didn't buy it. For weeks she was short with me, flat okay and sure answers, extra chores tossed my way. She called me lazy one morning, then corrected it to disappointing, which somehow felt worse. I kept thinking maybe I had read it wrong. Maybe he grabbed me because he was slipping. Maybe the smile was pain. But then I'd remember the words he used, the bed pat, the way he framed it as me being a good boy. I started taking a longer route to avoid their porch. I answered texts slow. I felt guilty every time I saw their light on. I didn't want to make trouble for Mrs. Collins. I also didn't want to be alone with him again. A few days later, Mrs. Collins asked if I could cover an afternoon. I said I had finals prep. Mom overheard and sighed loud enough that the cabinet door rattled when she shut it. At dinner, she told me it wasn't like me to be cruel. I said I wasn't being cruel. I was setting a boundary. She said boundaries were fashionable words for neglect. We went in circles. I offered to help Mrs. Collins with errands, yard stuff, anything that didn't put me in a room with him. Mom said that was theatrical. She kept volunteering on my behalf, and I kept backing out until she stopped asking me altogether. We had this quiet Cold War at home where everything looked normal, but every conversation bent back to that house, and every time I said no, she looked at me like I'd failed a test. 5 years went by. I moved a few hours away for college. We talked less, mostly about rent and classes, and whether my car needed new brakes. Then one afternoon she called, voice shaking before I even said hello. "He died," she said. I asked who. "Mr. Gray. In prison." Last week I stood there with my backpack half unzipped, not sure what to say. She kept talking because that's what she does when she's scared. A year after my thing with him, they arrested him for molesting a neighbor's 12-year-old boy. The kid told his parents right away. The cops took it seriously. It went to court. He got time. My mom kept repeating the timeline like saying the dates out loud would make sense of it. She said the investigation pulled old records. 30 years back, he had worked as a middle school custodian and got quietly fired for inappropriate behavior. Complaints were filed but buried. Different administrators, different excuses, same result. When the arrest hit the news, 4 adult men came forward and said he did things to them when they were kids. Names, dates, places. She paused there and cried into the phone, open sobs that made the line crackle. She kept saying, "I didn't believe you. I wanted to think you were wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I could hear the shame in her breathing more than in the words. She asked me to say something, anything, and I could only say I was listening. I told her I forgave her. I meant it, but something shifted and didn't shift back. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet click inside me that I can't unhear. I keep replaying that day at 19, how small it looks written out, just a hand on my shoulder and words that weren't threats, and how close I was to letting myself get talked into pretending it was nothing. People say to trust your gut, but nobody tells you what to do when the person telling you not to is your mom. I forgave her, but the part of me that looked to her to decide what danger looked like doesn't work the same anymore. I realized the bathroom lock was broken on my 3rd week there, but only because my Aunt Linda walked in on me for the 5th time. Before that moment, I was sitting in my freshman economics class at Portland Community College when my dad called to say we lost the house. Mom's cancer treatments had drained their savings over 2 years, and when she passed away that January, the medical debt collectors came for everything else. My brothers, the twins, had a basement to share at Dad's buddy's place, but there wasn't space for me. Aunt Linda, Dad's older sister, said I could stay in her spare room. She was a sales manager at a Toyota dealership, divorced, no kids, living in a 2-bedroom across town. Dad was desperate. I said yes before I even asked about the commute. The first 2 weeks were normal. She cooked, asked about classes, bought me Nikes I'd never buy for myself. Then the bathroom stuff started. Every time, a little laugh, the same, "Oh, I didn't think you were in there," and an apology that didn't match how often it kept happening. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was 19 and grateful. Then one morning the knob spun uselessly in my hand, and I realized the lock didn't actually lock. I tested it 3 times. It didn't catch once. I told her I thought it was broken. She said, "Oh, is it?" I never use it, like it was news, then changed the subject to dinner plans. That made no sense. She lived alone for years. I started showering fast, keeping a towel within reach, listening for the hallway floor creak. Every small sound meant my shoulders tensed up. It felt ridiculous to bring up again, so I didn't. That was on me. I didn't want to be the ungrateful nephew who came in and started making demands when she'd taken me in after everything fell apart. I'd been living a pretty standard life before everything collapsed. First-year business student, part-time at Target Electronics, girlfriend from high school named Melissa. We were fine. My family was fine enough. Dad managed a hardware store. Mom worked front desk at a dentist before she got sick. It all went slow, then fast. Stage 3 breast cancer. Insurance reviewing treatments that everyone said she needed. Mom signing for cards with limits she joked she'd pay off when she felt better. She didn't. She died in winter, and by February the bank gave us 30 days. I was 19, so I became the easy answer. Go stay with a relative so Dad could keep the boys close and figure out next steps. Aunt Linda looked like the safe option. At holidays, she brought gifts, told me to keep the extra 20 inside the card for snacks. No drama, no lectures. When Dad called her, she said yes immediately. Said she'd love the company. Said her office could be a bedroom, that we'd be like roommates. We moved my boxes in on a Saturday. She gave me fresh sheets, showed me where she kept extra towels, said, "You're family. This is our place now." I believed her. I wanted to. By the second month, she pushed for Friday night movies. Bonding time, she called it, since we were both single. She picked romantic stuff. The Notebook, Crazy Stupid Love, things couples watch when they want to cry or make up. I didn't say that out loud. On the couch, she sat so close our legs touched. I shifted an inch. She drifted that inch. The first time I thought maybe the couch was small. The second time I knew it wasn't. After movies, she wanted restaurants that were all candles and soft music. She'd say, "Let me treat you, celebrate your hard work, and wave off my Target schedule." Waiters gave us that quick look people give big age gap couples. I tried to opt out. "I've got a paper." "I'm dead tired," I'd say. She'd go quiet and look hurt. "I changed a lot to help you," she'd say. "The least you can do is a few hours." It wasn't yelling. That made it harder to push back. Then came the gifts. A new iPhone to replace my cracked one. "Your screen cuts me," she joked, handing me the box. Wireless headphones. A couple of shirts from Nordstrom that I'd never pick. And a PlayStation 5 she ordered, because I know you miss your games. I told her it was too much, and she said, "Don't argue with me. It makes me happy." But every box made me heavier. If I tried to skip a Friday, the gifts came up. "After everything I've done," she'd start, and I'd give in. I called Melissa to vent, and she said she was seeing someone new. She said long distance was hard, and she was sorry. That ended fast. I called my buddy Marcus from Target and told him about the movies, the gifts, the sitting too close. He said, "Dude, that's messed up," and then asked where I'd go if I left. I didn't have an answer. He said, "Yeah," and left it there. So I started making myself scarce. I picked up more shifts. I did homework on campus. If she texted movie at 7, I said I was stuck in the library or we were short-staffed. When I did go home, I went straight to my room and closed the door. If she knocked, I'd say I was on a call, even when I wasn't. The bathroom door still didn't lock, so I showered late and fast, ear-tuned for footsteps. I kept my clothes in the room so I didn't have to stand in a towel in the hallway. I wasn't dramatic about it. I was practical. I needed a place to sleep. Until I figured something better out, I would keep my head down and manage it. So I just started spending more time in my room with the door closed, coming home late after shifts, trying to minimize contact. Around April, she began drinking more. Wine at dinner turned into a bottle, then a bottle and a half. When she drank, she got touchy, kept a hand on my shoulder too long, played with my hair while I tried to study at the kitchen table, hugged me in the morning and wouldn't let go. She started asking about my dating life, if I was seeing anyone, if I'd ever been in love, what I wanted in a partner. I gave short answers and tried to make them boring. One night she sat on my bed uninvited while I was watching Netflix, got really close, and started talking about how lonely she'd been since her divorce, how her ex never appreciated her, how she'd stopped dating to focus on helping me. I said I needed to finish an assignment. She left, but I heard her pacing the hallway outside my door for an hour. After that, I pushed my desk chair under the doorknob before bed because the bedroom door didn't have a lock either. It wasn't dramatic. It was basic safety. Shoes by the bed, phone charged, Maybe that sounds paranoid. It felt necessary. Then in early May, I woke around 3 to the weight of someone at the far side of my mattress. I turned slowly, and she was there, on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling like it was normal. I whispered, "What are you doing?" And she said she couldn't sleep and didn't want to be alone, that it was nice to have someone in the house again. I said I had class early. She didn't respond. She lay there breathing heavy until she fell asleep next to me. I lay rigid and watched the dark until my alarm. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At 7 she woke, smiled like nothing had happened, and went to make coffee. I skipped my classes and called Marcus. I told him what I'd been dancing around for months, from the bathroom to the couch to her lying next to me. He didn't joke. He said, "You need to get out now." "I'll come get you," I said. I didn't know where I'd go. He said, "My place." I told him I needed a day to line up shifts so I wouldn't be broke. He said to text the minute I was ready. I spent the next 2 days avoiding the apartment when I could, locking nothing because nothing locked, and thinking through what I could carry in 2 bags. 3 days later, the breaking point hit. I was in the shower when the bathroom door opened. Through the frosted glass, I saw her silhouette stop and face me. She said she wanted to talk, that I'd been avoiding her, that we needed to discuss our relationship. I yelled at her to get out. She hesitated, then left. The second I was dressed, I texted Marcus, "Come now." I threw clothes, laptop, chargers, documents into 2 duffel bags. No folding. 10 minutes later, he pulled up. I went for the door and Aunt Linda blocked it, crying and asking where I was going, saying she'd done everything for me and I was abandoning her like everyone else. Marcus came up the stairs, said, "Excuse me," moved her aside without hurting her, and we got to his car. As we drove away, I looked back and saw her running after us down the street in a bathrobe. I stayed on Marcus's couch for 2 months until Dad found a cheaper apartment where the twins and I could share a cramped 2-bedroom. I didn't tell Dad the real reason I left, just said we had a disagreement about house rules. Marcus never made it weird, just handed me a key and a blanket and said I could stay as long as I needed. A year later, she still sends me Facebook messages from new accounts every few weeks asking to meet, saying she misses me, that she's sorry if she made me uncomfortable. I block them. Sometimes I see her car parked across from my dad's building with her inside. Maybe she's visiting someone. Maybe she's watching. I don't go out if I spot it. I sit on the couch, listen for the elevator, check the deadbolt, and tell myself leaving was the only thing that made sense. When I was 18, I got a summer job as an assistant instructor at Camp Riverside, this outdoor education program about 2 hours north of Seattle that ran programs for kids and adult team-building retreats. I needed the money desperately because I'd gotten into Western Washington University, but my financial aid only covered tuition, not housing or food, so I was trying to save everything I could before fall semester started. The job paid $15 an hour plus room and board in the staff cabins, which meant I could save almost every cent I made over those 3 months. The head swimming and boating instructor was this guy named Derek Thompson, 45 years old, married with 2 teenage kids of his own, been working at the camp for over a decade. He seemed professional at first, taught me safety protocols, how to run the waterfront activities, basic lifeguard skills I'd need to assist him. The camp director, an older woman named Patricia, told me I was lucky to learn from Derek because he was the best they'd ever had, completely reliable, beloved by parents and kids. First few weeks were totally normal. I helped kids with swim lessons in the morning, assisted with kayaking and canoeing in afternoons, sat on the dock as a safety monitor during free swim. Derek was friendly and helpful, and I felt like I was learning a lot. My background before that summer was pretty ordinary for someone trying to claw their way through college. I grew up in a working-class family in Everett. Dad was a mechanic and Mom worked at a grocery store. I had a younger sister named Jenna, who was 16 at the time. I'd graduated high school with good grades, got accepted to Western, but my parents couldn't help financially because they were barely keeping up with their own bills. I'd applied for every scholarship I could find, but still came up short on living expenses. This camp job was perfect because it meant I didn't have to pay rent all summer and could stack cash for the school year. I'd never worked with kids before, but I loved swimming and being outdoors. Figured I could handle it. The camp itself was on the shore of a lake, cabins for campers, a lodge for meals, a waterfront with docks, and a swimming area marked off with buoys. Staff were mostly college kids like me, plus a few older people like Derek who did it every summer. We all lived in staff cabins separated from the camper areas, had our own schedule of duties and time off. Those first weeks felt like the best job I could have asked for, exactly what I needed to get my life on track toward college. Things shifted in late June when the camp started running adult corporate retreat programs on weekends between the kids' sessions. These were team-building groups of 20 to 30 adults doing trust falls, ropes courses, and water activities. Derek told me he needed me to help run longer programs for these groups, including evening activities and occasional overnight camping trips that were part of their packages. The pay was the same, but it meant working weird hours, sometimes until 10 or 11 at night after a full-day shift. I didn't want to complain because I needed the job, and Derek said Patricia specifically requested me because I was doing such good work. That's when he started making comments that felt slightly off, telling me I looked good in my lifeguard swimsuit, that I was more mature than other 18-year-olds he'd worked with, that his wife didn't understand him anymore, but he could talk to me about anything. I'd laugh it off awkwardly because I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't afford to lose this job. He started engineering situations where we'd be alone together, like asking me to help him move kayaks after everyone else left the waterfront, or suggesting we take a canoe out to check the buoy lines when there was no real reason. He also started engineering situations where we'd be alone together. He'd ask me to help him move kayaks after everyone else left the waterfront, or suggest we take a canoe out to check the buoy lines when there was no real reason. If Tyler, the other assistant, was nearby, Derek would radio him to help at archery or the climbing wall for coverage, and then we'd be the last two on the dock. He kept his voice light, work-focused, the kind of tone that wouldn't set off any alarms if someone walked in and caught a sentence or two. I set quiet boundaries for myself. If he suggested checking buoys, I'd say we could do it in the morning when other staff were around. If he asked me to stay late to reorganize the boathouse, I'd mention cabin checks and logs I had to finish. I kept it practical. I needed the income, and I knew from day one that Patricia trusted him. I was 18. He controlled the schedule, the evaluations, the recommendation I needed for campus jobs in the fall. So I tried to be careful without making it a problem. By the second corporate weekend, the touches started. Small, quick, easy to dismiss if anyone saw. During a paddle skills demo, he stepped behind me to show leverage on the canoe cart, and his chest brushed my back. On the dock, he put his hand on my lower back to guide me around the life jacket rack, even though there was room to pass single file. When I tightened a kid's PFD, he reached in under my arms and said, "Here's the faster way," while I stood still and told myself to just keep things moving. He was careful if other staff were near. If someone walked into the boathouse, he'd switch to his neutral instruction voice and start talking about inventory numbers, swim ropes, radios charging. After lights out, he'd linger at the doorway like he was going to say something, then switch back to logistics about the next day's schedule. I started texting Jenna when I headed to the waterfront and when I left, even with spotty reception, just so someone knew where I was. I also kept my radio volume high. He'd stand too close, put a hand on my back, let fingers linger on my shoulders when adjusting my life jacket. By mid-July, I was actively trying to avoid being alone with him, but it was impossible given how the job was structured. He was my supervisor and controlled my schedule, knew where I'd be every hour of the day. The comments escalated. He said things about my body that made my skin crawl, asked if I'd ever dated older men, told me about his marriage like I was his confidant. Around other staff, he was clean and professional. I felt trapped because I'd already saved $2,000 towards school and I needed every penny. And if I quit mid-season, I'd have nowhere to stay. I tried to get put on extra lodge duty and ropes course rotations, anything that kept me off the dock. But schedules always needed coverage back at the waterfront. I called my mom once and tried to explain that something was wrong, but when she asked, "What's going on?" I froze, mumbled that I was tired and homesick. She said to hang in there, that it was only a few more weeks. Then in late July, he told me about an overnight fishing program for a corporate group. Insurance needed 2 staff for overnight trips, he said, and Patricia wanted the 2 of us. The night of the trip, the group canceled last minute, some kind of work emergency. Derek said we should still go scout the campsite for future programs. We took one of the camp's motorboats across the lake at sunset. Derek had a small cooler wedged under the front seat. Halfway across, he popped it open and pulled a beer. "You want one?" I said no. I was on the clock, and I was 18. He drank anyway, then another, talking louder each mile. He started saying I was different, more centered than other girls. Said his wife didn't touch him anymore, and he felt invisible at home. I kept eyes forward on the far tree line, and said we should be quick so we could get the boat back before full dark. We reached the far shore as it got dark. He said we should test the setup to make sure everything worked. Tent poles, fire ring, that kind of thing. I told him it wasn't necessary since nobody was coming. He said we were already there and it would look good in the trip log if we had photos of the site. I didn't argue more because I was alone with him, and he was my boss, and he was twice my size. He cracked another beer and stood too close while I unrolled the tent. I kept thinking it would be fine if I stayed practical and stuck to tasks. The details of that night are things I've only told to therapists and police. The short version is he crossed every line, and I couldn't stop him. I froze. I tried to get small and wait for it to end. He acted like it was private, like I'd somehow agreed by coming. At one point he said, "We're just talking," like reality could be edited by his voice. I remember counting my breaths and trying not to throw up. We took the boat back at dawn. The lake was flat and he hummed under his breath. At the dock, he handed me the radio like it was any morning and said, "Get some sleep before you're 10. I showered until the water ran cold and still felt dirty. I did my shift. I did the next day. I told myself I needed to make it to payday without losing it in front of kids. I avoided him by swapping errands, taking extra garbage runs, sitting in the bright open dining hall whenever I wasn't required at the waterfront. 2 weeks later, the summer program ended. On my last scheduled day, I told Patricia I wasn't coming back next year because of school. She hugged me and said Derek said I was a star. I nodded, collected my final check, and left. For 2 years, I didn't tell anyone the full story. I avoided lakes, avoided older men, avoided my own reflection longer than a second. I blamed myself for not quitting, for getting in the boat, for freezing. I finally said it out loud when Jenna, 18 by then and about to start college, told me she'd gotten a summer job at Camp Riverside and was excited to work with the amazing head instructor everyone raved about. I called the camp that day. I told Patricia everything. She was quiet, then said to come in. I filed a police report that week. Derek was arrested. 2 former staff from earlier seasons came forward after they heard. He took a plea, got 2.5 years, and lost his job and marriage. I'm 27 now, and I still can't swim in lakes without feeling sick, and I still tense up around older men. But Jenna never worked with him, and that's the only part that feels like I did something right. My parents died in a car crash when I was 18, right after I graduated high school. After the funeral, the house felt like a place I was squatting in, not home. Bills stacked up on the table like they were breeding. Grandma Ruth, my mom's mother, called every night. 2 weeks in, she said, "You'll move in with me, Kaylee. You're not renting a room near campus. I have space." She lived in Portland, a big old house that felt too quiet since Grandpa died 3 years before. I resisted for about a day, then looked at my checking account and the insurance payout that barely covered the caskets. I packed 3 duffels and took the bus north. The first months were rough. I cried in dumb places, bus stops, grocery lines, the shower. Grandma didn't try to fix it with cliches. She cooked, sat next to me during late movies, and drove me to campus to pick up my ID. She joined a church grief group for widows and widowers, said it helped to talk to people who got it. That's where she met David Harris. 62, quiet, neat hair, widower 5 years. They started getting coffee after the meetings, then dinner. He was polite when I met him, maybe too formal. After 6 months of this, Grandma set down her fork at breakfast and said very softly, "We're getting married." I nodded before I knew what my face looked like. I told myself she deserved happiness. That was true. Also true. I didn't want more change. But I hugged her and told her I was glad for her. The wedding was small. Church basement, a sheet cake, cousins I hadn't seen since I was a kid. David moved into the house the next week. He kept saying, "Your room stays your room." He was a retired accountant who alphabetized the spices and fixed the dripping kitchen tap without being asked. For a while, everything felt normal enough. He watched basketball in the evenings and rinsed his mugs. He asked about my classes like he really listened. Then little things started to bother me. My underwear went missing from the bathroom basket. Not the whole stack, just a pair. I assumed it got stuck in a towel or fell behind the dryer. I bought a new set. A week later, the panties from that set were gone too. Then shampoo. I bought a large bottle because the cheap ones kept disappearing too fast. That one lasted 10 days. I don't have that much hair, and Grandma used her own stuff. The laptop thing was what really got me. I always left it closed on my desk. I'd come back from the kitchen and it would be open. Browser on sites I hadn't visited. Nothing crazy. Local news. A recipe I'd never search, but not mine. After the 3rd time, I started locking my bedroom door even if I just went to the bathroom. It felt dramatic, but I told myself boundaries are normal. I kept my routine tight. Keys went into my pocket. Laptop went into my backpack. The backpack stayed zipped. If I left for campus, I texted Grandma when I was on the bus and when I got to class. David would nod when I came home. "How's econ?" "Fine." I watched him rinse dishes and couldn't read him. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe I was jumpy because of the last year. Still, I kept the door locked. Grandma volunteered 2 nights a week at the hospital, midnight to 6, registration desk. She liked feeling useful. One of those nights, I went to bed around 11 after finishing a paper. I locked the door, left the lamp on low because I'd been spooked lately, and fell asleep with my phone under the pillow. I woke up to a light touch on my hair, the kind you think is a dream until you're completely awake. My scalp prickled. I opened my eyes and saw David standing by my bed in the dark, his hand frozen above my head. We stared at each other. I jerked backward and smacked the lamp switch. The room lit up. He stepped back fast like I'd burned him. My blanket was half off, yeah, but not by much. "What are you doing?" My voice came out loud, not a whisper like I planned. He made a calm face. "You looked cold," he said. "Your blanket slipped." "I was just going to pull it up." "I can do it," I said. My hands were shaking. "Please leave." He nodded. "Of course." "Good night, Kaylee." He said it like a teacher ending office hours, then walked out and pulled the door shut like nothing was wrong. I locked it again with my hands still trembling, and sat there until I heard his bedroom door close down the hall. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lamp on and watched the line of light under my door for movement, and kept my phone in my hand, thumb on the emergency call. In the morning, I told Grandma, careful and specific. She frowned, not angry, more like disappointed in me. "Kaylee," she said, "he cares about you the way a grandfather would. You're not being fair. Don't be paranoid. David is a good man. He lost his daughter when she was little and he just wants to help." The night visits didn't stop. Twice in the next month I woke up with him standing by my bed, just watching. Nothing said, no blanket excuse, just his eyes on me like he was waiting for something. Once I felt his finger run along my cheek while I pretended to sleep. I kept my breathing slow and waited for the door to click before I moved. In the morning I decided I needed proof or I'd get talked in circles again. I bought a hidden camera that looks like a USB charger and set it on the shelf facing the bed. I tested the angle by waving at it and checking the file. It blended in with the other plugs. I didn't tell anyone. I started sleeping in leggings and a hoodie and kept my keys under my pillow. I wedged a chair against the door even though I knew he had a way around locks. 3 nights later, Grandma was at the hospital. I locked my door, put my phone on vibrate, and left the lamp low like I did now. I woke at 1:58 to the knob turning. The lock held. 2 minutes later, there was a tiny metal click, the kind you hear when someone knows what they're doing. The door opened. I kept my eyes almost closed. David came in and stopped beside the bed. He stood there like the last 2 times. 5 minutes is long when you're counting. He touched my hair, slow, like he owned the right. He ran his hand over the blanket across my thighs and paused. He leaned so close I felt his breath and had to bite the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't flinch. Then he left, quiet, the way he came in. I didn't sleep. At 6, I took the charger out and downloaded the footage to my phone with the door locked. The timestamp was 2 a.m. It showed exactly what I felt. He entered, stood over me for 5 minutes, touched my hair, dragged his hand over the blanket at my legs, leaned in near my face. No confusion. No mixed signals. I waited for Grandma to get home. When she walked in, I poured coffee and handed her my phone and said, "Please watch this." I watched her watch it. I expected shock, anger, protectiveness, something that meant she saw me. I thought she would be furious at him. She watched the entire clip without pausing. When it ended, she set the phone down and folded her hands like we were at a meeting. She sighed and said she understood it was hard for me after my parents, but David was her husband. He had never hurt anyone. Maybe he had nightmares and sleepwalked. She would talk to him. I said, "He picked a lock." She said, "You don't know that." She stood up and left the room before I could answer. I heard them down the hall, voices low and careful. He sounded defensive, then wounded, then tired. She sounded soothing. I stood in the kitchen holding the empty mug because doing more felt like it would make things worse. When he came back through, he didn't look at me. He took the trash out like it was a regular morning. The house felt smaller. That evening, Grandma came to my room and said David was very upset that I was spying on him. She said she thought it was time for me to start an independent life, find an apartment, and she would help with the first payment. She said couples need privacy and routines, and maybe my grief made me extra sensitive. I asked if she believed the video. She said she believed he didn't mean harm, and that was the point. I didn't argue. There wasn't a sentence that would move her. She chose him. I moved out 2 weeks later. I found a room in an apartment with 3 roommates who cared about first month, last month, and washing your dishes. I packed during the day when they were both out. I kept the video on my phone and in 2 cloud backups. I bought a door wedge and a cheap alarm for my new bedroom. I texted Grandma my new number because not sending it felt like opening a different fight. She texted back a thumbs up and a note about budgeting and work hours. I told her I was safe and would visit when I was ready. I sent my new address because I didn't want to lie sitting there. On move-in day, I signed the sublease, handed over my share, and carried in 2 duffels. Grandma transferred $3,000 to me and stopped calling first. Last March, I was cleaning out my parents' house in the suburbs of Houston. They both died in a car accident 2 years ago, and I finally got around to dealing with their stuff. The attic was packed with boxes I barely remembered. Old tax returns from the 80s, my dad's report cards, random utility bills, nothing worth keeping. In the far corner, under a mess of dust and webs, I found a Timberland shoebox stuffed with yellowed envelopes. Most of it was predictable. More taxes. Some wedding photos of my grandparents from 1967. My grandfather in some kind of uniform. At the very bottom was an official envelope with the Harris County Registrar seal dated April 3rd. It was a birth certificate. Real, official, watermarks and all, for a Jacob Alejandro Morales, born April 3rd, 1968, in Houston, Texas. Mother: Rosa Morales, address listed as a house on Main Street. Father: blank. What froze me wasn't the name. Nobody in my family is named Morales. It was the birthplace address. It matched my grandparents' old house. They lived there in the late 60s before moving. Same day, same city, same house. I sat on the dusty floor staring at it and doing the dumb mental math. Because my dad was born April 3rd, 1968. Exact same day. Only his name was James Collins. I flipped the envelope over and there was handwriting in faded blue ink. My grandmother's for sure. Those round letters from every birthday card. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel like a mix-up you shrug off. I called my Uncle Martin, my dad's younger brother, the only one left on that side. I asked if he knew anything about a Jacob Morales born in April of '68. The line went so quiet I thought the call dropped. I checked the screen. Still connected. Then he asked, very slow, "Where did you find that?" His voice sounded tight, almost scared, like I'd said a word we don't say. I explained about the shoebox, the certificate, the matching address and date, the note in Grandma's hand. He let out a long exhale I could hear and said it probably got mixed in by accident, that my grandparents had Latino neighbors back then named Morales, and things get jumbled during moves. You know how it is. He talked too fast. It felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing that sentence for years. I told him I wanted to talk in person. I said I needed real answers, and I wasn't going to throw it away and pretend I didn't see it. He went silent again, then said he'd drive up to Austin the next Saturday. When he showed up, he looked older than 52. He looked like he hadn't slept right in months. We sat in my living room. He asked for whiskey, even though it was barely 3. Half the glass was gone in one gulp. He kept staring at the floor before he finally met my eyes. He said he was about to break a promise he gave his mother, my grandmother, never to tell a soul. But she'd been gone 5 years. My grandfather even longer. My dad too. So maybe secrets didn't matter to the dead. He started in 1967. My grandfather Robert was a personal driver for a powerful Texas congressman, a guy with years in politics and friends everywhere. My grandmother Eleanor couldn't have children anymore. 2 miscarriages, 64 and 66, nearly killed her. They wanted a baby anyway. Adoption was a maze then. Paperwork, fees, waiting lists that went on forever, especially for working-class people. Early 1968, the congressman had a problem. A private problem that never made the paper because his connections were bulletproof. The maid in his big house, an 18-year-old from Mexico named Rosa Morales, got pregnant. The father was the congressman. He never admitted it, but everyone in the house knew. He'd been married 25 years, 3 grown kids, perfect family image. An election was coming. If the truth got out, his career was over. In April 1968, Rosa delivered a healthy baby boy. She wasn't discharged like other mothers. Instead, in her hospital room, 2 men in expensive suits walked in, lawyers, with a stack of papers and a brown envelope full of cash. Those lawyers were told to make the problem disappear at any cost, and they told Rosa very simple things. If she didn't sign a relinquishment right now, this minute, she'd be deported immediately. Her family in Mexico would be found and their lives made hard. She'd never be allowed back into the US, not even as a tourist. The baby would be taken by a court anyway. Or she could sign, take $10,000 in cash, more money than she'd ever seen, and leave. Start somewhere else. Pretend none of it happened. She was 18, scared, alone in a country that wasn't hers, no family, no backup. She signed. She didn't get to hold her newborn, didn't really see him, didn't get to say the name she'd picked out. My grandfather, as the congressman's most trusted guy, the one who drove him to meetings that never hit the calendar, who knew the secrets, was offered a solution to his and my grandmother's problem. Take the baby, they said. Off the books. No adoption, no paperwork that could surface later, no questions. You've wanted a child. Here's your gift from a grateful employer. He agreed. He knew it was illegal. He knew it could wreck their lives if it came out. But he'd watched my grandmother fall apart after each loss, watched her freeze up at the sight of pregnant women on the street, watched her stare at playgrounds and blink away tears. He said yes. They took baby Jacob out of the hospital 2 days after he was born. The congressman's people handed him over in a shopping center parking lot like it was contraband, wrapped in a blue blanket. And they passed my grandparents the original birth certificate just in case, they said, so you can prove the child exists legally if something goes sideways. Though of course, nothing would. 3 months later, in the summer, my grandmother suddenly told relatives and neighbors she was pregnant. After years of pain, a miracle. They went to Dallas to stay with distant family, supposedly for a specialist in constant monitoring. They came back 6 months later with a tiny baby boy they introduced as their biological son, James Robert Collins. The congressman, with his connections in every office and hospital, got a perfect birth certificate made with the right name and their names as parents. It looked real because, for all practical purposes, it was. As real as anything stamped and sealed by people who owed him favors. The real certificate for Jacob Alejandro Morales went into the attic, tucked in that box, and sat there for almost 60 years until I found it. Rosa Morales was deported a week after she signed. They put her on a bus south with the envelope of cash and very clear instructions. Never come back, never ask, never talk. They sent her back to Monterrey where her family lived. My uncle said he heard rumors, years later by accident, that she died in Mexico in the early 70s, maybe 72 or 73, from an illness. No details. She never knew what happened to her first child. She never knew if he lived, if someone loved him, if he was safe. The congressman won his key election, kept building his career, chaired committees, cut ribbons, got his name on plaques, gave big donations to schools and hospitals, died of a stroke decades later surrounded by family. People at the funeral said he was a great man who left an enormous legacy. My father, the infant Jacob turned into James, lived and died as James Collins. He grew up in a home that fed and housed and hugged him. He married my mom in '92. I was born in '97. He worked as an engineer, traveled, laughed, paid for Little League, fixed things, gave basic dad advice, and then in 2019 he died in a car accident. He never knew he was Jacob Alejandro Morales, the stolen son of a Mexican housekeeper and a powerful American politician. My uncle said my grandparents chose to carry the secret to their graves. They were afraid the truth would wreck my father's life, that he'd hate them, that our family would break apart, that he'd go looking for his biological mother and learn what was done and at what price. My uncle also insisted on one more point. My dad never felt unwanted, not one day. My grandparents adored him. He grew up safe and loved. And after my dad arrived, somehow my grandmother had more children the normal way. 7 in all, which she always called a blessing she credited to James, as if he unlocked something in her. Now I keep Jacob's certificate in a safe, and I don't know what to do. There are probably half-siblings out there who have no idea he existed, and I have no idea about them. Everyone who knew the full story is dead except my uncle. I think about Rosa, 18, bullied into signing, sent home with cash and threats. I wonder if she died thinking about that first child she never held. I wish I could tell her, yes, your son had a good life, people loved him, he had a son, and that son is holding his real birth certificate and trying to understand what it means to be built from other people's secrets and stolen lives. So for the context, I was 19 and living at home with my mom while going to community college because I couldn't afford dorm housing, and it made more sense to save money. Mom met Brad about 8 months after her divorce from my dad was finalized. Brad worked in pharmaceutical sales and seemed successful with his nice car and expensive suits. They'd been dating maybe 5 months when he moved into our house, and another 4 months before they got married at the courthouse. I wasn't thrilled about it because the speed felt weird, but Mom seemed happy after years of being miserable with Dad, and Brad was polite enough to me in the beginning. He had this way of saying the right things, talking about wanting to be part of our family, respecting that I was an adult and he wasn't trying to be my father. The first month after the wedding was fine, maybe even good. He paid for repairs the house needed, took us out to nice dinners, seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my classes. Then he started commenting on Mom's spending, saying little things like, "Let me handle the boring stuff." He pushed to combine accounts so he could reduce her stress, and he kept at it until she agreed. He told her she didn't need to work anymore because he had it covered. She gave notice. After that, he folded everything into this routine. He brought home a label maker and organized the pantry, then corrected Mom when she put pasta on the wrong shelf. He took the paper bills and set up auto pay to simplify, and the mail started coming addressed to him because it's easier for the mortgage company. If packages arrived, he opened them first to check for damage. He'd stand behind her while she was on her laptop and suggest password changes, which really meant he wanted everything written in the little notebook he kept in his desk. When I asked why he needed that, he laughed and said, "What if something happens to me?" "You'll thank me," Mom said. It was practical. I kept my mouth shut because arguing made her tense. Before Brad entered our lives, I'd been managing okay. I was taking classes toward an associate degree in graphic design, working part-time at a Starbucks 15 hours a week, living with Mom, and splitting some bills. My parents' divorce when I was 17 had been messy, but necessary. Dad had a gambling problem that tanked their savings. Mom finally left him, We moved to a smaller house she could afford on her salary. I stayed because rent was insane, and I was trying to avoid loans. Mom worked 9 to 5. I had classes and shifts. We coexisted fine. She started dating Brad through an app. He was 42, divorced, no kids, stable and normal on paper. I met him after 2 months and he was okay, a little intense about how much he liked my mom. When they got engaged after 4 months, I said it was fast. She said at 40 she didn't want to waste time. Small courthouse wedding, dinner after. He moved in the same week, and suddenly our quiet 2-person house had another presence there all the time. He didn't come in barking orders. He sat with me and asked about my projects, gave sales guy pep talks about discipline and deliverables, and told me he respected my independence. But rules showed up without being called rules. If I was 15 minutes late, he'd be at the kitchen island with the TV paused, asking if traffic had been bad on the freeway I don't take. If I left a mug in the sink, he'd rinse it and say routines help everyone. He wanted scheduled family dinners, then got irritated if I had class. He suggested a shared Google Calendar so we don't miss each other, and when I didn't add things, he'd text Mom to ask where I was. It all sounded helpful when he said it. It felt like being audited. Within 2 months of Mom quitting her job, Brad had installed security cameras in the living room, kitchen, both hallways, and the front entrance. He said it was because there'd been break-ins in the neighborhood, which was true. There had been 2 that spring. But 8 cameras seemed excessive for a small 3-bedroom house. He showed Mom how to access the feeds, said we could check any time. What he didn't say was that he was watching constantly. If Mom lingered in the kitchen, he'd ask if she was snacking again. If she went to bed early, he'd come in and ask if she felt sick. He set activity alerts, so his phone pinged when doors opened. I came home once and he said, "Lost your keys?" Took you 4 tries to unlock. I hadn't told anyone that. He started controlling groceries, questioning if we really needed certain items, counting calories on her plate, and framing it as caring about her health. He put limits on takeout for the budget. Mom started losing weight and getting quieter. When I asked if she was okay, she gave me a tight smile and said she was fine, just adjusting. He changed the Netflix profiles and deleted mine because it was clutter. When a friend texted to invite me out, Brad asked what time I'd be home before I'd even answered. I started keeping my backpack zipped and my laptop with me at school. Twice I found my door closed when I'd left it open, and my chargers coiled differently. He said he'd straightened up. Brad also started inserting himself into my life in ways that felt wrong, asking where I was going when I left, wanting to know who I was texting, suggesting I spend more time at home instead of hanging out after class. He'd position it as caring. Gas prices are high, late nights aren't safe, finals are coming. Just keep me in the loop so if something happens, I know where you are. I kept answers vague and did more homework on campus. I called my dad from outside more because Brad made comments anytime he heard the name. He'd call him that guy, like my dad didn't have a name. Mom would change the subject. Once I tried to call my dad from the house phone to arrange picking up some old stuff I'd left at his apartment, and Brad grabbed the phone out of my hand, said we needed to go through him if we wanted to contact Dad because he was protecting Mom from Dad's toxic manipulation. The first incident of physical violence happened in November, when Mom gently disagreed with Brad about something minor, I don't even remember what, and put her hand on his shoulder like she always did to calm things down. He spun around and shoved her hard enough that she stumbled into the kitchen counter and hit her spine on the edge. I yelled and ran to her, and he switched modes instantly, voice soft and apologetic, saying he didn't mean to. It was work stress. He'd see a therapist. He'd make an appointment first thing Monday. Mom nodded, even though I could see a bruise already shadowing under her shirt. That night, I heard her crying in the bathroom with the fan on. In the morning, she acted normal and made oatmeal like nothing happened. I started locking my bedroom door at night and pushed my desk chair under the handle because the lock felt flimsy. After that, he started walking the house in the middle of the night. I'd wake up and see the shadow of feet under my door and hear him test the knob. Sometimes he'd just stand there for minutes. Once I forgot to lock it and woke to find him next to my bed, hands in his pockets, watching me breathe. I turned on the light so fast the bulb flickered, and he said he was checking if I was too cold. He thought he heard me coughing, but I hadn't been sick. He didn't leave right away either. He waited for me to lie back down like he needed to watch that too. I started sleeping with my phone in my hand, and the emergency screen pulled up. I moved a heavy sketchbook under the pillow because it made me feel like I had something to swing, even if that was stupid. I stopped showering when he was home. I timed it for when he left for the gym. Things escalated over the next 6 months. Brad isolated Mom by making her delete her Facebook and clean up her digital footprint, took her car keys to save on insurance, and said her friends were negative influences who didn't respect marriage. He monitored every dollar in the bank app and had a full meltdown because she bought a $10 lipstick. I kept telling her we could leave. She'd rub her eyes and say it was complicated. He wasn't a bad person. He was just under pressure. It would even out. One afternoon when he was at work, I used Mom's laptop to look up domestic violence resources and shelters. I didn't clear the history because I was rushing. Mom had texted she was almost home from the grocery store. That evening he checked the laptop, saw the searches, and lost it. He screamed that I was poisoning her and locked me in my room from the outside for 3 hours, while Mom stood in the hallway crying and asking him to please just talk. When he let me out, he told me in a calm voice that if I tried to turn her against him again, I'd need to find somewhere else to live. A week later, I was using Mom's computer again to print a paper and accidentally opened his documents looking for printer settings. There was a folder called Research. Inside were hundreds of files, photos of me from social media with notes about my schedule, screenshots of location data from some tracking app I didn't even know when he'd gotten on my phone, and similar files on at least 4 other young women I didn't recognize, with their routines and addresses. I took pictures of everything with my phone, deleted recent files lists, and closed out. I called my dad immediately. He picked up on the first ring. I sent him the photos. He said, "I'm coming tomorrow," and hung up to figure out logistics. Dad showed up the next day while Brad was at work. We took what we could carry, 1 suitcase each, and left. Mom kept saying we should wait, talk it through, and I showed her the files on my phone. I watched something crack in her expression. She stopped arguing. We went to Dad's apartment. That week we filed a police report. Detectives served a warrant, pulled his drives, and found evidence of stalking multiple women, along with photos of Mom's injuries and notes from her co-worker who had reported concerns months before. Brad was arrested. He took a plea. Time in state custody, probation, a no-contact order, and a registration requirement. Now I'm 24 and in another state finishing school, but I still check the locks 3 times and keep a light on. Mom goes to therapy twice a week and keeps a small bag packed by the door because it helps her breathe. I think about how close we came to staying, how small each step seemed until the door was locked from the outside. How if I hadn't opened that folder, we might still be in that house with cameras watching everything and him standing in the hallway at night, waiting. When I was 24, my Uncle Frank took custody of his 18-year-old nephew Ethan after Ethan's mother died of cancer. She was Uncle Frank's younger sister who lived in Nevada, and when she passed, Ethan had nowhere to go, no other family. Uncle Frank lived alone after his divorce 2 years earlier, no kids of his own, so he offered to let Ethan move in with him. The family thought it was generous, taking in an adult nephew during such a hard time. Ethan was quiet, withdrawn. which made sense since he just lost his only parent. He barely spoke at family gatherings, sat in corners, stared at his phone. I felt bad for him. Losing your mom at 18 is terrible. But something about him made me uncomfortable from the start. The first time I met him was at my mom's house. He shook my hand without looking up. His palm was dry, like he'd anticipated the contact and prepared for it. He stood behind Uncle Frank the whole time, almost in his shadow. When I tried small talk, school, plans, he shrugged and said he wasn't sure. Fine. Grief does that. Still, when I went to the bathroom, I noticed the hallway mirror tilted down, like someone had adjusted it to see a shorter person. Nobody else was short. Later, I caught him retilting it before I came out, then stepping back quickly. Maybe it was nothing. I told myself it was nothing. A few weeks later, he started following Uncle Frank on his contractor jobs. Frank said it was to keep Ethan busy, teach him some skills. But when I dropped off coffee, Ethan didn't help. He stood near the doorway watching me and barely blinked. When I left, he was in the front room pretending to look at tools. I sensed him behind me on the porch and moved aside so he could pass. He didn't. He stood, so I had to squeeze by him. I said, "Excuse me," and he said without moving, "You're fine." Frank called from inside, and Ethan stepped back then, like he'd been waiting for a cue. By October, Ethan had an Instagram full of black and white photos. He never posted selfies. My cousin showed me his profile. Cemeteries, crosses, stone angels. No captions, just dates. I asked Frank if he was okay. "He's working it out," Frank said, staring at his knuckles, which he does when he's stressed. "He needs time." Thanksgiving confirmed the cemetery thing wasn't a phase. After dinner, Ethan sat apart and scrolled through his phone. I sat beside him, keeping it light. "Hey, I saw your photos. You into photography?" He stared at me for a long couple of seconds like he was deciding who I was. "I like how peaceful they look," he said. "How quiet." I nodded, said I could get why he'd want quiet. He didn't look away. It wasn't flirty. It felt like being measured. My mom gave me the look, "Be kind," and I tried, but I moved to the other end of the couch after a minute. At another family dinner in December, he stood in the doorway to the kitchen while I fixed a plate. No talking, no reason. Not blocking exactly, but there. When I stepped toward the doorway, he stepped the same way. I said, "Could you move?" He said, "I am moving," even though he hadn't. Frank told me later, he's trying to be social. He just doesn't know how. Don't take it personally, I wanted to believe that. I really did. By spring, the staring got worse. Ethan was 19 now. I was 25. At my dad's birthday party, Ethan showed up in a navy jacket like he was going to a job interview. He stood too close when he talked to me, leaned in like he couldn't hear though the room was quiet. When I stepped back, he stepped forward. His breath wasn't bad. I noticed because it was inches from my face. I said, "Can you give me a little space?" He blinked once, like I'd said something in another language, then said, "Sure." He didn't move. I started managing my routes through the house. If I went to the bathroom, I waited until I heard him on the other side of the house. If I went to get more salad, I scanned the room first. I didn't make a big deal about it. I just adjusted. Frank told me Ethan was taking a community college class. "He's doing better," Frank said. "He needs family around him." Once, I was alone in the kitchen getting a drink. I opened the fridge, crouched to get a can, and when I turned, he was right behind me. No footsteps, nothing. I almost ran into him. I said, louder than I meant to, "Oh my God, you scared me." He grinned. Not happy, Not embarrassed, just pleased he'd gotten a reaction. "Sorry," he said, but the smile stayed. I stepped past him. His shoulder brushed mine. I waited in the hallway for someone else to come by before I went back into the living room. 2 weeks later, he did it again. Same kitchen, same silent approach. I heard the faintest scuff, turned fast, and his face was there. I said, "Don't do that." He said, "Do what?" I said, "Walk up behind me." He tilted his head like a dog hearing a high sound. "You're jumpy," he said. I put the drink down because my hands were shaking and I didn't want to see it. I started skipping things. If I had to go, I brought my boyfriend, or I stuck near my aunt. I felt dramatic and also not wrong. My phone buzzed during a Sunday dinner. I stepped outside to take it, and when I came back in, Ethan was standing in the entry like he'd been waiting. He looked at my phone in my hand, then at me. "Who's that?" he asked, like he was entitled to know. "Work," I said, and walked around him. My cousin noticed the way I moved around the room. She cornered me by the hallway and whispered, "Why are you being cold to Ethan? He's going through a hard time and needs family support." Last month at Uncle Frank's barbecue for the 4th of July, there were about 15 family members in the backyard. I went inside to use the bathroom. When I came out into the hallway, Ethan was standing there blocking the way back to the yard. He was 20 now, I was 26. He didn't say anything at first. He just adjusted his stance like he'd planted himself there on purpose. I tried to step left to pass. He stepped the same way, close enough that I had to stop. His face was blank, like he'd turned something off. He said, very even, "We need to talk alone. Come to my room for a minute." I said, "No," and put my hand out to slip past toward the kitchen. He moved again, blocking me. Same distance, calm like this was normal. I said, "Move, Ethan." He said, "Just for a minute. I need to show you something. You'll understand." He nodded toward the hallway like it was already decided. His voice was flat, insistent, no emotion in it at all. My heart started hammering. I looked past him for Uncle Frank, for anyone, and heard the grill lid clang outside and everyone laughing at something my dad said. I kept my voice steady. "I'm going back out." He said, "Not yet." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. He had his hands at his sides like he was trying to look harmless, and that almost made it worse because it meant he'd thought about how this would look. I shifted my weight to go the other direction, and he matched me again, not touching, but this tight little dance that only we could see. "Ethan," I said, "move now." He looked at me for a long second, like he was checking if I'd fold. "You need to see it," he said. "You need to hear me without them." I said, "Whatever it is, tell Frank." He shook his head once. "He won't get it." I thought about all the times I'd found him behind me in doorways. I thought about that smile in the kitchen. I reached for my phone in my back pocket and felt nothing, left it on the patio table. He took a half step like he'd noticed. My mouth went dry. I lifted my chin to make space without actually gaining any and said, "If you don't move, I'm getting my dad." He didn't blink. "It's not like that," he said. "Stop making it a thing." He raised his hand like he might point down the hall, then lowered it, like he'd decided not to touch me. Outside, someone shouted, "Fireworks later," and a cheer went up. It made the hallway feel narrower. I set my shoulder, ready to push past hard if I had to, and he leaned in a fraction, still blank, like we were in a standoff he expected to win. I yelled, "Dad!" Ethan stepped back immediately. Dad came in through the back door fast, scanned the hallway, and looked at both of us. "What's wrong?" he said, voice low but sharp. I said, Ethan wouldn't let me pass. Dad's eyes stayed on Ethan longer than on me. No anger, just a measuring kind of stare, like he was adding it up. He reached for my hand and said, "Come on," and walked me outside without looking away from Ethan until we hit sunlight. For the rest of the party, Dad stayed within 10 feet of me at all times. He didn't make a show of it, didn't hover so close it drew attention. He just stood where I was standing, sat where I sat. If I went for a drink, he came too. When Ethan drifted toward the patio door once, Dad stepped over so he was between us and asked Uncle Frank if he needed help with the cooler. Ethan stopped and turned away like he'd changed his mind. I kept conversations light and normal. Dad kept it even lighter, making quiet jokes, but he didn't leave my side. When I picked up my phone from the table, he pretended to check a text just to stay there beside me. After the fireworks, Ethan sat alone on the far end of the yard with his phone. He didn't look at me again that night. Uncle Frank came over once and asked if I'd seen Ethan earlier, said he'd been off the past week. I said I wasn't sure. Dad put a hand on my shoulder and said, "She's fine." And Frank nodded and wandered off, confused. When I brought it up to Mom later, she said I was overreacting, that Ethan just wants to connect with his cousin, he's still grieving and doesn't understand social boundaries yet. She said, "You know how boys that age are." "It's awkward," I said. "He blocked me in a hallway." She frowned and said, "Talk to Frank. Don't make a scene." But Dad hasn't left me alone with Ethan once since that day. We don't talk about it. He just appears at my elbow when Ethan enters a room, like it's a reflex. Uncle Frank still insists Ethan is just lonely and needs time to adjust to having family again. I've let it be because I don't want to blow up the family over something that, to anyone who wasn't standing there, sounds small. But I keep replaying Dad's face in that hallway, the way he squared himself between us and didn't ask follow-up questions. It made me feel less crazy. It also made something very clear. Whatever excuses people want to make, he saw enough in a single look to take me by the hand and not let go. My parents picked up my older brother Ethan from the correctional facility on a cold October morning, and I was standing in the driveway when they pulled up, feeling this knot of dread in my stomach that I couldn't explain to them. He stepped out in state-issue grays, thinner than I remembered, hair buzzed, eyes doing that flat scan of everything like he was checking for exits. Mom hugged him first, crying into his shoulder and saying, "You're home, baby," like that fixed anything. Dad did the firm handshake turned hug and gave me the look he gives when he needs me to play along. I swallowed it. I'm 21, I reminded myself, not a kid. I'd moved back 6 months earlier after my roommate bailed and left me with full rent, so I was in the spare room doing remote tech support, saving every paycheck. I could pretend this was temporary and normal. Ethan, being 24 and fresh out after an aggravated assault, didn't fit normal, but Mom and Dad had a plan. Family dinners, therapy, no dwelling on the past. I didn't argue because it's their house, and I eat their food. Still, the knot stayed. It had been there since they told me the release date. Ethan was adopted when he was 14. I was 11 and excited in that kid way because having a brother sounded cool. The first 2 years, he kept to himself. Then 16 hit, and everything went sideways. Fights, petty theft, coming home with that dead stare that said he'd decided rules were for other people. The assault at the bar turned a bad pattern into a record. Mom blamed herself, said it was attachment trauma, said they should have gotten better therapists. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, he knew what he was doing. When they parked that morning, I helped unload the plastic bin of prison-issue stuff and the cardboard box of his personal effects, which was basically a couple books and a tape player with no tapes. He shook my hand a little too hard and said, "Little bro," with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. I told him welcome back and meant it in the way you mean it when you're praying a problem won't be your problem. Before Ethan came back, my life was boring in a way that felt like progress. I'd finished my IT degree, scraped a remote support job at 40 grand, and was splitting an apartment with Tyler until he texted me a picture of the mountains from 3 states away and an "I'm sorry, man" about the lease. I dragged my stuff home because debt wasn't worth pride. Mom teaches middle school, Dad's an accountant, same 4-bedroom I grew up in, same neighbors who wave while watering lawns. They didn't shame me. They told me, stack your cash and pick somewhere you actually want. I was doing that, trying to ignore the old history. Ethan and I were never close, but we were tolerable until he started doing things that told me something in him liked breaking stuff. He'd take my things, not because he needed them, just to watch me react. Once, he laughed when our neighbor's cat limped across the yard like it was a joke the world told him. The assault that got him locked up was worse than the headline. Pool cue to a stranger's face until the guy needed surgeries. Mom and Dad visited every month and came back saying he was different. They have good programs in there, Dad would say. He takes responsibility now. I wanted to believe, mostly for them. The first week he was back, Ethan ran the script like he'd memorized it. "Let me help with that." "Thanks for dinner, Mom. How's work going?" He asked me about ticket queues and VPN issues, nodding like he cared. Mom and Dad lit up. They sent texts to the family group like a press release. "He's doing great." I tried to let that be true, but little things stacked. He'd linger by the knife block, fingers tapping handles like he was picking one. I'd find him sitting in the dark at the bottom of the basement stairs. No phone, no TV, just there. When he'd pass me in the hall, he'd grip my shoulder, friendly squeeze, too hard, holding my eyes until I had to laugh it off. "Dude," I'd say, and he'd smile. One afternoon, I was in the backyard taking a break from a guy screaming at me about his printer drivers. Cooper, our 8-year-old golden retriever, trotted around with his tennis ball. Cooper is not a tough dog. He's the kind of dog that leans his whole weight on your leg because love is heavy. Ethan came out and whistled low, snapped his fingers, asked for the ball. He threw it hard toward the back fence, and Cooper chased like always. Ethan followed at an easy walk. I heard the yelp. Not a bark, not a stepped-on-a-thorn yip. A pain sound. I was moving before I knew it. Cooper was 3-legged, hopping back, blood splashed on his front leg. Ethan stepped out from the bushes, hands up. "He must have caught it on something," he said. "There's metal back there." His face was concern arranged in the right places. He helped me carry Cooper inside, held the towels, told Mom, "It's not too bad," with that calm voice he uses when he wants to be the reasonable one. At the vet, they shaved and cleaned and found the wound. Clean, narrow, deep. "Looks puncture-like," the vet said. "Screwdriver, maybe." "Not a branch." "You'll need antibiotics and stitches." In the car, my chest did that tight thing. I drove home slow, thinking through every possible innocent version and landing nowhere good. In the kitchen, Dad was slicing apples, and Ethan was telling Mom how fast he got the towels, like that mattered. I waited until Ethan went to the bathroom and told Dad, low. The vet said it looked like a stab wound. Dad's face closed. "Don't do this," he said. "I'm not doing anything. I'm telling you what she said. It wasn't a bush. It was... Stop." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You're looking for reasons to doubt your brother because you don't want to accept he's changed. We are not doing that in this house. A few weeks later, I came home from errands and found the door from the house to the garage locked from the outside. I'd gone out there to grab tools and heard the lock click. I banged and yelled for 20 minutes until Mom got home and let me out. I was furious. I said someone locked me in on purpose. Ethan, the only one home, said he didn't hear anything, headphones on, watching TV. Mom believed him and said maybe the lock was faulty. I checked it myself. It worked fine. The next morning it turned smoothly, no sticking. 3 days later, I woke up at night to use the bathroom and found Cooper at the bottom of the basement stairs, neck wrong. Ethan said he'd heard a thud, came down, found him like that, must have fallen in the dark. Cooper had lived there 8 years without a single stair problem. I looked closer, and there were marks around his neck that looked like fingers. I told Dad, and he told me I was seeing what I wanted to see, that I needed to stop sabotaging Ethan's progress. I didn't push it because I didn't trust what Ethan would do if I made this a fight in front of him. We buried Cooper in the yard. Ethan said a few nice words and didn't look at me. I called my friend Marcus and asked if I could crash. He wanted to help, but he's in a studio and said it wouldn't work long term. So I stayed. I slept with my door locked and the bat next to my bed. I kept my car keys in my pocket in the house so I could hit the panic button if I needed to. I timed my showers for when Mom was home. I ate quick, standing up, and kept my phone charged. Every new quiet sound in the house made me tense. In mid-November, Mom and Dad said they had to drive upstate for a family wedding, leaving Friday evening and coming back Sunday. I said I'd go. They said there wasn't a room, and besides, we were adults who could handle a weekend. I begged them not to leave us together. I told them I didn't feel safe. They got angry, said I was being dramatic and unfair to Ethan, who'd been good since coming home. They left Friday at 6. I texted Marcus to keep his phone on. The first few hours were quiet. Ethan stayed in his room. I stayed in mine. Around 11, I went to the kitchen for water and the light didn't come on. I tried other switches. Nothing. Through the window, the neighbors still had power. I used my phone flashlight and checked the electrical panel in the utility room. All the breakers were switched off. Someone had done it on purpose. I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow. Heavy. I called out, "Ethan?" No answer. I ran up and saw him at the end of the hallway holding my baseball bat from my room. He said, flat, "We're going to play a game now. You should start running." I sprinted for the front door, dead-bolted. The key wasn't on the hook. Back door, same. He didn't run. He just walked toward me, steady, eyes on me like I was a problem to solve. I backed to the bathroom at the end of the hall, went in, locked it. I turned off my flashlight so he couldn't see the glow under the door. I called 911 and whispered that someone was trying to hurt me, gave the address, begged them to come fast. He dragged the bat along the walls, metal on plaster, and tried the handle twice. He hummed pieces of songs and said the game wasn't fun if I didn't play. When I finally heard sirens and saw red and blue through the bathroom window, I started crying with relief I was trying to hold in. Police broke the front door and shouted. The dragging stopped. They found Ethan sitting on the living room couch with his hands up. They arrested him for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of parole. Mom and Dad got back 3 hours later to police still at the house taking my statement. I watched them age when they understood what almost happened. Ethan went back to prison with additional charges. My parents' marriage cracked under the blame and guilt that followed. I moved to Marcus's couch the next day, then into my own place within a month, even though I had to use credit cards to afford it. I'm 22 now, and I haven't spoken to Ethan since that night. I've limited contact with my parents because I can't forgive them for choosing belief in a dangerous person over protecting their other son. I get why they wanted a success story. I wanted it too until it nearly got me killed. Some people can't be saved no matter how much you love them, and sometimes the family that's supposed to protect you is the one putting you in danger. About 2 years ago, my Aunt Caroline married Mark Wilson after dating him for 8 months. Aunt Caroline had been divorced for 5 years and was raising 2 adult daughters, Ashley 20, Kayla 23. Everyone said she seemed lighter. Mark's job paid. The wedding was pleasant. His enthusiasm felt forced. Mark moved into their house, and my cousin said things felt different. He explained how to do laundry like they were 12. He offered to handle the bills, because that's what men do. He stood too close while talking, cheerful. Ashley started taking drives. Kayla began staying late at work. It wasn't extreme. It built. 3 months later, Ashley asked me to meet for coffee. She didn't stall. "He's overly friendly," she said. "Every morning he comments on our outfits. You look beautiful. That dress shows your figure." He insists on hugs when we leave. Hugs while cooking or TV. He walks into bedrooms without knocking. Caroline said he grew up affectionate and meant well. The girls started locking their doors. Mark called the locks cold and told Caroline they were shutting him out. He'd rap and open, claiming he assumed permission. Kayla said he stood in the hallway, listening. I told them to document everything. 2 months' friendliness turned into supervision. Mark asked where they were going, who they were meeting, when they'd be back. He texted during dinners for updates, dozens in hours. If they didn't respond, he sent, "Answer me now." When Ashley joked, wrote, "If something happens, you'll wish I'd asked more." Kayla's boyfriend noticed her phone draining and found a tracking app she didn't install. They confronted Mark with Caroline. "Did you put this on my phone?" Kayla asked. "Yes," he said, calm like a teacher. "There's much crime." Caroline said he was protective. Ashley checked hers and found same app. A week later, a mechanic found GPS device on Ashley's car. She called me crying. I told her to keep the device, take photos, save the receipt, and go home. When they told Mark they'd removed everything, he went quiet and scolded them for being ungrateful, reckless, and naive still. They tried to negotiate. Ashley offered to share her location with Caroline. Kayla offered to text once on arrival and once when leaving. Mark called it a start, which meant it wasn't enough. He kept messaging, asking photos and names. When they delayed, he told Caroline girls, shutting him out. They bought bedroom locks and started changing in bathroom. Mark called the locks hostile and said doors create secrets. He tried to turn it into a meeting about trust. Kayla told him trust goes both ways. Ashley asked him to stop touching them without asking. He announced cameras to deter prowlers. When they disabled the tracking app again and refused to reinstall it, Mark said, "You can't remove my ability to protect you, and then blame me when things go wrong." Caroline echoed him word for word. Ashley laughed once, tired and flat. Mark called her disrespectful. The girls felt suffocated. By then, I was the person they vented to. I'm their cousin by a years, and I've had my share of boundary fights at work. I tried to keep it practical, save screenshots, speak to him together, use language. Don't be alone with him if you feel cornered. Keep locked. Caroline wasn't oblivious. She was defensive. She'd been stressed about money for years, and Mark brought stability. She kept saying, "He means well," like a mantra she needed. I understood loving the help and fearing conflict, but I told her meaning well doesn't erase impact. The girls changed routines daily. Mark always had reasons. He'd pull out news stories about abductions, stolen cars, wrong place, wrong time tragedies. He'd say, "You don't know how fast things go bad." He kept a voice, like concern was proof of innocence. It was persuasive if you wanted to believe it. It crushed them if you didn't. After they deleted the apps and removed the car device, Kayla set her phone to require biometrics for changes. Ashley turned off calendars Mark had set up. They told him boundaries weren't punishment. He said boundaries were barriers to protection. Caroline agreed. They held their line. The girls felt suffocated. It got worse once the girls didn't jump to answer his texts. If Ashley let a call go to voicemail, he'd call again, then start in on the group chat with me and Kayla like we owed him an update. He began appearing where they were. One afternoon he stood outside Kayla's office with coffees, said he was already in the area. Another time Ashley left a lecture and he was leaning on his car by the entrance. He'd smile like it was a coincidence. It wasn't. He started evaluating their friends out loud. "That one looks like a bad influence," he'd say. "Why is she dressed like that for class?" He told Caroline they should spend weekends as a family, and she repeated it to the girls like a rule. When Ashley started seeing a guy from her program, Mark insisted they do dinner. He ran it like an interview. "How often do you drink? Do your parents have debt? What's your 5-year plan?" The kid looked shocked. He tried to answer politely, then finally said he had an early morning and left cash for his share. Ashley left right after him. Mark called the boyfriend weak. Caroline said he should have toughed it out. By then, Kayla was 24 and Ashley 21, both living like adults. But Mark kept talking curfews and house standards. He wanted calendars. He wanted keys back. He wanted copies of their lease agreements even though they still lived at home. They told him no. He told them they were making him the bad guy. They reached their limit in the same week. Kayla found him scrolling through her texts on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. He said he thought it was Caroline's phone. Ashley came home to him sitting on her bed, claiming he'd killed a spider. They didn't scream or make a show. They moved out. They found a small apartment, signed fast, loaded their stuff in one weekend with help from a few friends and me. They left the house keys on the table. Caroline called them cowards and said, "You're abandoning the family," like they were packing for a vacation. She kept saying they didn't give Mark a chance. The girls said they had, for months. About 6 months later, Caroline called me crying so hard I couldn't understand at first. I thought someone was hurt. She said Mark had been fired. Not downsized, not restructuring. Fired. HR had investigated harassment complaints. Not one complaint. Multiple. The women were around Ashley's and Kayla's ages. 3 of them filed formal reports, and there were more notes in their system. Caroline said she'd read the summary twice and threw up. The reports were almost copy-paste of what the girls had told her. He commented on their appearance constantly. "You look beautiful today. That skirt really shows your figure." He texted outside work hours, late, with emojis and questions about their personal lives. He popped by their apartments to drop off samples, and then lingered. He installed tracking on their work phones for efficiency on the road. One woman got a restraining order after he showed up in her parking lot at night and waited. HR found he'd been doing it for over a year. He'd transferred accounts to stay around the same age group. The company terminated him. Caroline said, "I finally believed them, like it was new information." She called the girls and apologized without making excuses. She asked me to be with her when she told him she was filing for divorce. She did it in the daytime, at her sister's place, with a neighbor present. He tried to argue, said HR overreacted, said the women misread kindness, said Caroline was throwing away a marriage because your daughters can't handle structure. She answered, "I'm done." She didn't waver. She changed the locks the same day. She met with a therapist the next week because she couldn't stop replaying every time she told the girls to be nicer. The girls got a restraining order too after he circled their apartment twice and texted, "We should talk." The police served him. He moved to another state within a month. Last we heard, through a mutual friend, he forgot to scrub. He's doing the same thing at his new job. I still think about how ordinary it all looked at first. How easy it is to miss the pattern when you want a problem solved and someone shows up claiming they can fix everything. Caroline is doing the work now, actually listening, actually checking facts, not leaning on what she wishes were true. The girls keep their guard up without apologizing for it. I don't say, "It'll be fine," because that's not a promise anyone can make. But I do answer their calls, and when I tell them to keep records and trust their read of a situation, I mean it. Growing up, my mom's family lived in Arizona. We were in Washington, almost 3,000 kilometers between us. We saw each other once every 2 or 3 years, mostly at weddings or funerals. When I was 20, my cousin Chloe, 2 years older than me, got married. The wedding was in Phoenix. I came with my parents. Chloe was always like an older sister to me. As kids, I spent summers at my aunt's house. Chloe and I built tree houses and watched horror movies we weren't supposed to. I was happy for her, genuinely. Her husband, Dr. Graham Kane, was 38, a surgeon, confident, handsome, made good money. Everyone kept saying what a catch he was. I remember thinking Chloe looked relieved, like she could finally breathe. My mom whispered that it was nice for one of our side to finally marry a doctor. Like that detail alone meant the scary parts of life would back off for a while. I didn't think much of him beyond surface stuff. I was focused on not screwing up my toast and trying not to sweat through my rented jacket. At the rehearsal dinner, he shook my hand and said my name like he was trying it on. Jason, right? Washington kid. He asked about school, what I was majoring in, what I wanted to do. I told him I was switching between computer science and business. He said something about decisive people doing better in medicine and grinned like it was a joke. During group photos, he put his hand on my shoulder, firm, and left it there while the photographer tried to wrangle aunts and uncles. It felt longer than necessary, long enough for me to notice. In the bar line, he reached over and adjusted my shirt collar. "You'll look better in photos." And his fingers rested on my neck for a second. I flinched. He smiled like he hadn't seen it. I told myself it was nothing. People touchy at weddings. Everybody hugs. I didn't want to be the guy who makes a normal moment weird. Later, leaving the hotel bathroom, he came down the hallway and clipped my shoulder. "My bad," he said, then caught my hand in a handshake and squeezed too hard. A quick flash of pressure, looking right at me while he did it. Near the dance floor, he passed behind me, touched my hip, lingered a beat, then moved on like nothing. I kept scanning the room for Chloe. When I found her, she was laughing with her bridesmaids, tired, happy, holding her shoes in one hand. I stuck with my parents after that and helped my uncle carry cases from the caterer. That's what I do when something feels off. I find a job. I figured maybe I was imagining it because he was older and confident and I was just some college kid in a rental suit trying not to look like a kid. He kept being friendly, which complicated it. He cracked jokes about the DJ. He told me I had a good head on my shoulders and that Chloe always said I'd do well. When I drifted away, he'd find a reason to drift back. "You tried the brisket? What year in school?" And there was never anything to complain about in a single sentence. It was all very reasonable on paper, nothing you could point at and say this is wrong, and that made me second-guess myself. I hate drama. I'm the person who carries chairs or stacks plates so I don't have to stand in the middle of anything. When my mom asked what I thought of Graham, I said he seemed nice and that Chloe looked happy, which was true, and also the safest answer I could give. A month after the wedding, Graham started sending me messages on Instagram. At first it was harmless. "How's school? Did you watch the Seahawks game? Chloe says hi." He sent a photo of a steak and asked if I could cook. He followed my private account. Advice arrived on smart routes through undergrad. I answered briefly, out of politeness. He was my cousin's husband. Ignoring him felt rude, and I didn't want Chloe thinking I was keeping distance from her new family. I kept it short. Doing fine. Midterms soon. Tell Chloe congrats again. He'd heart the message and toss in a thumbs up. It felt like small talk that had wandered into my phone. He wrote once a week, then more often. The tone shifted in little ways I almost talked myself out of noticing. Messages came late at night. He'd ask specific questions about my schedule. He invited me to visit. We've got a guest room, easy flight, and said we should play golf when I was in Arizona. I don't play golf. I said, maybe someday, and left it there. He replied with longer paragraphs, stories about residency and how he used to grind, advice about professors he didn't know, things that sounded like mentoring but also like he wanted me to keep talking. It felt like he was building a bridge I hadn't asked for, plank by plank, and every time I tried to step back he'd drop in something about Chloe that made backing away feel mean. Then he sent a gym selfie. Shirt damp, mirror shot, caption, "Gotta stay in shape. Do you work out too?" I stared at it and set my phone face down. I didn't answer that one. A few hours later, he followed with, "LOL ignore, Chloe says hi." That made me feel stupid, like I'd invented a problem. I told myself I was reading tone into pixels. For a week he went quiet, and I thought that was the end. It wasn't. He came back with links to articles about pre-med programs, even though I'd never said pre-med. He asked if I'd considered moving to Arizona after graduation. Lots of tech, better weather, you'd love it. He told me about his schedule, how surgery days started before sunrise, how discipline is everything. Some of it was normal older guy advice, some of it wasn't. I kept my replies polite and short and spaced out because I didn't want to start anything with Chloe over nothing. 6 months later, Chloe and Graham had a daughter, Emma. My aunt sent photos to our family chat, baby in a tiny hat, and my mom cried in our kitchen. The christening was scheduled for my spring break weekend, which fit everyone's calendars. Chloe called me and sounded tired and happy and said, "You better come, Jason," and I said, "Of course." I told myself all the weird stuff at the wedding was crowded room confusion, and the messages were just clumsy friendliness. It helped to think that. I focused on Chloe and the baby, and on being decent. I booked the time off my part-time job, and tried not to overthink it. I came with my parents. The ceremony was at church, then lunch at a restaurant. Graham was attentive to me again in a way that felt like a performance. He brought me a plate of appetizers I didn't ask for, poured water I didn't need, asked if I was comfortable sitting there. He said it loud enough for the table to hear, like he wanted points. I kept my answers neutral. Chloe looked tired but happy. Emma slept in a carrier, and everyone leaned in to peek. I stuck close to my parents and helped my aunt cut food. After lunch, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. The men's room had 2 urinals, 2 stalls, 2 sinks. I stood at the sink, scrubbing off the bread grease, when the door opened and Graham came in. He walked to the sink next to mine even though the other one was free. He stood close. His shoulder almost touched my arm. He looked at me in the mirror and said, "You've grown so much, Jason." Turned into a man. "Chloe says you already have a girlfriend," I said no. It came out flat. He smiled like that was a setup. "Such a handsome guy and single. Girls must be crazy about you." His shoulder touched mine, intentional. I stepped back. He stepped closer, like the room had shrunk. "If you need relationship advice or anything else, you know, man talk, always reach out." I'm happy to help. His breath was steady. It felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I mumbled thanks and reached for the door with wet hands. I went straight to the table and sat between my dad and my aunt. My dad looked at me, then toward the bathroom, then at Graham when he came out a moment later. He didn't say anything. He just shifted his chair so his knee touched mine and kept it there through dessert. He asked if I wanted more bread, which was his way of asking if I was okay. I said I was fine and focused on Emma's soft sounds and on cutting my chicken small so my hands had something to do. The next day, I told Chloe. We were in her kitchen, just us, while my mom and my aunt tried to get Emma down for a nap. She was feeding Emma from a bottle and scrolling her phone, exhausted. I said, "Graham acts strange with me, touches me for no reason, writes too often. In the bathroom yesterday, he stood uncomfortably close. I kept it calm and factual, so it wouldn't sound like I was attacking her or trying to start a fight." She laughed. Not mean, just tired. "Jason, he just wants to get close to the family. You know Graham has no brothers. He always wanted a younger brother. He sees you as a nephew or younger friend. Don't make things up." She said it like she was smoothing a wrinkle. I said the touches felt wrong. She interrupted, gentle but firm. "Graham is a good person. He did a lot for me. Don't ruin my relationship with my husband because of your paranoia." She kissed Emma's head and changed the subject. I shut up. I didn't bring it up again. I rinsed bottles, took the trash out, made her coffee. When Graham came home from a quick stop at the hospital, I said hello and kept a chair between us, which looked polite from a distance. He talked about the christening and joked with my uncle about the pastor's microphone cutting out. If you recorded the day and played it back without context, it would sound like any other family weekend. That's what made it hard to explain. Each moment alone was small, but the pattern wasn't. On that same visit, I noticed my dad started staying near me whenever Graham was in the room. Dad would drift over during conversations and ask me about school or my car, so I'd stand next to him. When I got up to throw something away, Dad got up too. He didn't leave me alone with Graham once. We didn't talk about it. He didn't make a scene. He just matched my movements like we had practiced it. I knew what that meant. He saw the same thing I did and decided to protect without starting a family fight. I still think about that kitchen conversation. I get why Chloe defended him. New baby, a marriage she needs to believe in, a husband who looks perfect on paper. People stick to the version that lets them function. I'm not angry at her. I keep my distance now. I don't answer late-night messages. I visit with my parents or not at all. I don't need a showdown to know where the lines are. What I learned from that trip is simple. Trust small alerts, and trust the people who quietly stand next to you when you do.